easily the worst thing about The Last of Us Season 2 is the discourse. This would be true whether the episodes were flawless masterpieces or irredeemable trash. Not because the talking points are bad, per se, but because, like the spores that spread the cordyceps, the same tired old arguments just linger in the air, waiting for more people to latch onto. Among those talking points are the question of whether or not the vaccine the Fireflies plan to make using Ellie's immunity would have actually worked. In and of itself, there's the potential of an interesting discussion there, because, as in so much speculative fiction, the science of the story and the science of the real world don't match up. But that's true far beyond the question of the vaccine. Even the cordyceps infection itself, if it actually matched what happens in the real world, would see infected humans dragged by the fungus to somewhere high up in order to die and release spores in the hope of infecting more people down below. No runners, stalkers, clickers and bloaters. Probably an easier to contain infection too, rather than a global apocalypse. But as I say that, you probably recognise the difference between sticking rigidly to realism and using the idea of an infection as a mechanism to tell, in effect, a zombie story. There's lots of interesting stories you can tell with hard sci-fi. Look at The Expanse, for example, as a story which relies on realism to move through space instead of transporters and warp drives. But that rigid adherence to real-world scientific logic isn't necessary for the willing suspension of disbelief. What matters is that the story follows its own internal logic. Coming back to The Last of Us, that's true with how the infected behave, and it's true about the vaccine. There's no suggestion within the text that it would not work. The doctors looking to make it believe it will work. The Fireflies believe it will work. Joel believes it will work. And there's nobody within the games or within the TV show, in dialogue or in artifacts, who argues otherwise. However, when this was confirmed again in an interview by Neil Druckmann, it once more ignited the discourse around this. And when I say that this talking point is tedious and worn out, I'm not talking about simple nitpicking to say that the writers did the science badly. They almost certainly did. But so what? That's great for an explanation of real-world science, but does nothing to help us understand the story. And people aren't bringing this up to fact-check the writing. They're doing so primarily as an argument that Joel was right to do what he did in the hospital. That the vaccine wouldn't have worked, and the Fireflies couldn't mass-produce and distribute it. Therefore, Joel was right to stop them. The problem with this, and I'm saying this as someone who does think Joel was right to do what he did in the hospital, is that it entirely misses the point of Joel's actions on multiple levels. Firstly, it assumes a whole lot in regard to Joel's decision making that simply isn't true. Joel did not weigh up the probability that the Fireflies could make a vaccine, or the logistics of getting that to the wider population. He believed that it would work, and it didn't matter, because making it results in Ellie's death. He is, once again, faced with a child he loves dying at the hands of men with guns. And this time, he is not going to lose her. If we believe that he did what he did because the science was unsound, do we in turn believe that he would accept his sacrifice if the science was airtight? Of course not. It's a ridiculous notion. The science being sound doesn't mean the ethics are. In much the same way that the positives of the medical and scientific advances we have in the present, including the lives saved by them, do not retroactively justify the crimes against humanity that were committed in so many cases to bring us those advances. In retrospect, there are worlds of moral complexity for us to wrangle with. But in the moment where someone commits violence to save their loved one from such a crime, the morality becomes so much more straightforward. What matters in terms of the story is the simple fact that Joel believed that the cure would work, and that he didn't care. Because that wasn't what was at stake for him. Ellie was. The second issue is a wider issue with how people view Joel's actions at the end of Last of Us Part 1. So many people describe it as the trolley problem. Save one person or save the world. But I don't actually think that's true. For the Fireflies it is, sure, and they've made their decision that the loss of one life is acceptable for the salvation of humanity. But Joel isn't faced with the trolley problem, and nor is the player. Neil Druckmann has openly stated this multiple times. The actual question we are being asked here is more straightforward. How far would you go for someone you love? Joel isn't weighing up whether the vaccine would work. He believes it would. And he isn't weighing up whether the future potential lives saved by a vaccine are worth Ellie's sacrifice. Because he doesn't accept the idea of her sacrifice. His only question is, can I save her? And the answer is, yes, whatever that takes. Another reason why the discourse around the vaccine is so exhausting is because it is, more often than not, tied into conspiracy theories. From before The Last of Us Part 2's release, when plot details were leaked and the controversy and rage over the story started building to a fever pitch, there have been a group of people whose hate for the second game was so great that they opted not just to critique the game and move on, but to build a whole narrative around it, with Neil Druckmann as the hate figure at the centre, claiming that the second game was made to destroy the character of Joel by people who hated him. The conspiracy theories claim that The Last of Us Part 1 was so good because Druckmann's worst impulses were contained by game director Bruce Straley, and he lacked creative control. As soon as he got it for Part 2, he set out to destroy a beloved IP and its main character. This is, of course, nonsense. The original Last of Us story was Druckmann's baby from when he pitched the first version of it for a university assignment before he came to work at Naughty Dog. He wrote the overwhelming majority of the first game, far more than he wrote of the second, where Hallie Gross was brought in as narrative lead because of the responsibilities of Druckmann's more senior role at Naughty Dog. And he had the same role as creative director on both games, with Bruce Straley's role as game director on Part 1 taken by Anthony Newman and Kurt Marginal. Part 1's story is the result of Druckmann's writing and direction, and Part 2's is still Druckmann's creation, but far more shaped by Hallie Gross in the details. Part 1's story is the result of Druckmann's writing and creative direction, and Part 2's is still Druckmann's creation, but far more shaped by Hallie Gross in the details. There are legitimate reasons to like Part 2, or to not like Part 2, but not to build a conspiracy that warps reality in order to justify obsessive hate. And while it's absolutely not true to say that everyone who believes the vaccine wouldn't work and that this is what justifies Joel's actions comes from this conspiracy theory echo chamber, those voices are absolutely among the loudest. And where this fits into the conspiracy, of course, is that claiming the vaccine would work is supposedly a retcon in order to vilify Joel and prove he was wrong. But this only works if you remove Neil Druckmann from the authoring of his own creation, and assign motives to him other than those he has stated publicly. Because not only has he repeated these points recently with Season 2 of the TV show, but he has said this from the beginning. First, that the vaccine would work. That's both in the text and publicly stated by the writer. Second, that Joel's actions posed the question of how far we would go to save someone we loved, and that this dilemma was directly inspired by Druckmann being a father himself, and the wish that he could do this to save his own daughter. In other words, not only is Joel Druckmann's own creation, his actions are inspired by what Druckmann himself wishes he could do if faced with a similar situation. To claim that he hates Joel, or wants to prove Joel's actions wrong, given that context, is utterly absurd. Troy Baker sums this up best.
When we were making Part 1, I was at a disadvantage to Neil because Neil was a father. And he wasn't, I was acting. This was a very real possibility for him. What do I look like in the event I lose my daughter? And I have a son, and I don't know what I would look like if I lost him. But I do know that if I had the opportunity to save him, I would do anything. I would do anything to save him. So people have asked me, why would Joel do that when he could have saved the world? And my answer to them is always this: he did. He did save the world. It's just that the world was that girl, and that's it.
If we focus so much on the practicalities of the cure, especially if we try to ascribe that to Joel's motivations, we lose sight of the actual point here. Which is why, while it might be interesting in its own right to discuss the realities of the science behind the vaccine, it doesn't tell us anything useful about the story or about Joel's motivations. If you enjoyed this video, then give it a like and consider subscribing to keep up to date with all my content. Like the video that's just popped up, which YouTube thinks you should watch next. This is a Patreon and member supported channel, so if you want to become a member and unlock custom badges and emojis, early access to my videos, and your name in the credits, then click the join button below. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.